Hey everybody, it's great to be here. We're talking today about the 21st century city. It's a very interesting topic, and we have a very interesting group of people to be part of that conversation. We'll start, and we'll be calling the speakers. We first have MaryAnne Gilmartin, who's a major developer here in New York City, and who's really transforming the city landscape and building the 21st century city. I'm also happy to invite Mayor Michael Hancock from the city of Denver. He is really a champion for the future and inclusive city. We'll be talking about that. We're having from the Netherlands, Coen van Oostrom, who is a developer turned into a tech entrepreneur. So thanks for coming, Coen. And finally from Sweden, Karlsson, who is the Swedish State Secretary to the Minister of Housing and Digital Transformation. He's a policymaker, but he's also driving a major national initiative to build infrastructures for the 21st century city. I'll move there to get started. And I think that probably what all of us have in mind here today is, what is the 21st century city? Yeah. 5 kilometers away from here in that direction, we have Ellie Island. 60 million people came to the city, around 60 million people from around the globe. And they came here in search of opportunities. One of the things that we know about opportunities and global economic growth and development, that it's about cities. Cities are growing and they're also competing for talent. So when we think about building a 21st century city, we're talking about competitiveness, we're talking about talent, we're talking about creating the environments where people from around the globe, the creative class, people like you, they want to be. Yeah? So there are different aspects in this conversation. We talked a lot about in this conference, in other fora, about the importance of cities and sustainability. Most of the missions, 70% of the missions in cities around the globe come from cities. We also know that cities are very important in terms of innovation. 80 to 9% of the innovation around the globe happens in cities. This once again ties back, connects to the 21st century city, talent, and the environments that we're building, the innovative environments that we're building for that. My organization is present or represented in 35 nations around the globe. We have members that are nonprofit innovation and competitiveness councils, government agencies, leading global research universities and corporations. And this whole conversation about competitiveness, it's really about cities today, increasingly about cities, right? What we're talking here today, it's really, we know a lot about technology. We're talking about technology. We are starting with technology and going towards the global landscape, right? We know that technology is growing exponentially. The iPhones or the mobile phones, the smartphones that all of us have in our pockets or hands, they would cost around $900,000 US if when the different features that are embedded, included in those things were launched. A GPS, a camera, a computer. You can get that for $700 today. We have this understanding. We also know that the data is exploding. In general, flows around the globe have been growing, but not that much. But data flows are growing 24, 25% a year compound annual growth. So the future city will be in some way, or the 21st century city, leveraging technology. For sure, there's an important digital component, but at the end, once again, and this is a conference about people, powered by people, it's a city where people want to come, live, and thrive. And for our conversation here, we'll start with technology and how we're doing that on the ground. Coen, as I said when I introduced you, you are a developer turned into tech entrepreneur. How did that happen? And what are some of the developments that you are involved today? I know that the Edge, your project, is one of the most innovative and sustainable buildings in the globe, and you're really leveraging technology. But in addition to that, you just started up a new company, so you turn your real estate development into a technology platform. So what is the 21st century city for you?
Well, I guess that we made a building called The Edge, and it opened 3 years ago. And the building is working so much better than anything that we've seen before, that we were like, okay, let's leverage this technology and do a lot more buildings like that. And what happened in my company, we started 20 years ago just being an office developer, and we grew in different countries in Europe, basically not doing very different things than other developers would do. But then I met Al Gore 10 years ago. He convinced me to make sustainable buildings. And sustainability was great, but what was more important that for the first time in a company, we put 10 people together and said, you're the sustainability team, bring us innovation. Go and talk to universities, go to talk to startups, go to Siemens and Schneider Electric and see what they're working on, and let's integrate that in buildings. And we made this building for Deloitte in Amsterdam called The Edge. And it was working so much better than what we expected. The building is energy neutral, it's healthy, it's smart. And suddenly we found out that it doesn't make sense that every time when we make a building, we start all over again and do everything bit by bit again in New York or in Seattle. Why don't we just standardize that technology and put it on multiple buildings? And then the architecture can still be very different, but the underlying technology can be the same. And if you do that in the right way, and you make a learning loop, you can make a lot of buildings, and you can get data out of all those buildings, and you can start to understand why it is that people want to sit on the north side of the building and not on the south side of the building. And then you can take in your next building, you can give that as a design feature to the architect and make sure that he designs accordingly. Now we know, we have got so much data coming out of these various buildings that people do not like to sit on a yellow couch. They love to sit on blue couches, but not on yellow couches. And so we have millions of data points at the moment that give us information on how to make better buildings. And we think the future is there.
So can I talk with The Edge? Can I say, hey Google, hey Siri, hey The Edge? When is that coming?
That is happening already, but what we see is that people don't really like it so much. We see that the app functionalities are being used a lot more. One of the new things we're working on is face recognition, and our dream is that the building knows where you're going to work that day. They know you're going to work in the top floor of that building. And wouldn't it be cool that if you walk into the entrance, that the elevator already recognizes your face, sends the elevator, and the elevator is ready to bring you there. When you're there, the coffee machine already knows what kind of coffee you want, and the coffee is there ready for you to go as well. And those are the features. They're a little bit gimmicks, but sometimes it starts with a gimmick, and then it becomes a serious way of working in a different way in the building.
MaryAnne, technology has really enabled this place, New York City, to stand up and to rise up, right? From Audis in the elevator to steel making, whatever. Different technologies allow this city to have the landscape it has today. You are a landscape changer, right? You've been involved in some of the very cool transformational real estate developments in the city. How do you see this type of thing that Coen has mentioned, leveraging the landscape here in the city? But also, what are some of the other aspects? I know that your new company, you're really talking about inclusiveness, yeah? And you have that in your website. So how do you capture those trends, and how do you see cities in the 21st century being developed?
That's a great question. I'm happy to be here with the panel. Much of what Coen is doing abroad is inspirational for me as a developer here in New York. I am first and foremost a hopeless developer, and that is how I applied my craft for almost 30 years. And I think for me, I think New York has a lot yet to do to compete on the world stage in terms of innovation, technology, in changing skylines and ground planes. And obviously this is a place where everybody wants to be. And so the talent aspect suggests that we could figure it out and we could be the best of the best. But when you think about putting a building together and what it takes to change a place and transform a skyline, it's not so easy in New York. And I think for many years over the course of my career, it was a commoditized business where we drove efficiency and economics, and we ended up with forgettable buildings, in the course of the last 2 to 3 decades, and it was unfortunate. And I think that the innovation economy has brought the worker closer to the discussion. So back in the day, when we were thinking about companies moving around New York City and growing, the first thing we would do was look up the address of the CEO. And 9 out of 10 times, that was exactly where the company would move, because the CEO called all the shots. In the innovation economy, the war for talent is so extreme that now we recognize that we're all in the hospitality business, including technology companies and service companies in New York that want to keep talent. And so that means that the people that are changing the landscape of technology and really redefining the economic base here in the city are participating in discussions about where they want to work, how they want to work, and who they want to work with. And I think that's been a major drive toward why we as developers, who often only do things we need to do to survive, it's not always the highest form of art. I mean, I think that we ought to have deep responsibility because we have such an impact on cities. But now developers are starting to say, how do I build buildings that are responsible and that make people feel healthy? We have an old building stock. The average age of our commercial stock in New York City is close to 70 years old. And Midtown zoning and other initiatives will change that. But in many ways, putting together a building like the New York Times headquarters, we did that by hiring an Italian architect and putting that building together in France. It's not that we couldn't have done it here, it's that we really need to disrupt the process here in New York and look at ways of building buildings where there was a premium on light and air. And it wasn't just about the square footage of the space, the height of the building, the views from the top floor and all of that. So I'm proud of the fact that I think we've changed the discussion here in New York. We've upped the ante, but we still have a lot more to do.
Yeah. And I think you brought one very interesting perspective to the conversation, that's systems integration. I think that you deal with very complex projects. So we were bundling finance, technology, legislation, and different things, right? What are some of the new models that you see emerging for development in this, and really integrating new trends and new perspectives that we just highlighted?
So Steve Jobs said it takes crazy people to change the world. Well, we built the tallest modular building in the world in Brooklyn, and it's 32 stories, and it's a steel chassis system that rocked New York City's landscape because we got the unions in New York City to cooperate with us. And it was a mad thought, and we did it next to Barclays Center. And we lost about $150 million and ended up in a major litigation because it was the first time ever. And it was an extremely difficult thing to do. But that building stands today, and what it shows me is that you can put a building together where 65% of it is comprised of and put together in a factory where every floor is built on the ground floor. It's a tempered environment, the quality control is off the rails, and the people and the workers are safer as a result. Essentially everything but the paper towel rack is put together. It came down Flatbush Avenue 3 miles away from where it was put together. It was an amazing thing. It was not an easy concept to put together, but in New York City, we need to optimize the performance of the building trades, and that can be done in ways, whether it's bathroom pods, modular buildings, or transforming the building trades business through technology, 5-dimensional plans. The engineers, the architects are doing it. The developers, the cities, and the unions need to embrace it. So I do think, building modularly where things are done in an optimal fashion, and it's not the parade of trades going up a giant tower and doing things in sequence in a highly inefficient way. We need to stop building buildings like our great-grandparents built them here in New York City.
Yeah, so what you just said is, so engineers and architects are doing, developers and others maybe should catch up. It's really this integration of institutional perspectives. So the constraint is really not technology, right? It's about models and different solutions. Mayor Hancock, you are overseeing the future of a major US city, yeah? And you recently announced a proposal to double the funding for affordable housing in Denver, right? So, and I think that MaryAnne mentioned that in terms of new models, how do you see the 21st century city being built in your city, and how do you connect that with people, creating this inclusiveness opportunity?
Roberto, great question. First of all, I'm proud to be up here with this distinguished panel. And the reality is that 21st century cities, if we start with the foundation that 21st century cities are, great cities are connected cities. And you can take that from the very basic understanding that they are connected based on the fiber optics and the ability to get people on the information highway and make sure they have access to all the information in the world, or to some of the greatest technologies in the world, but also on mobility, but also housing, which is the greatest equalizer with regards to sustainability and inclusiveness. Here's the reality. Less than leveraging technology, today great cities leverage expectations. And expectations of the societies that we serve want access to great housing, affordable housing, want to be able to move about their cities without being in congestion, and want to do it on their options, whether it's biking, walking, transit, or in automobiles. they want to live in decent, affordable housing. They want to be able to access technologies, and they want to do it quickly, very quickly. I often tell young people, I say, let me tell you the difference between your generation and my generation. In America, when I grew up, we like pot pies. Everybody knows what a pot pie is. But when I grew up, it took me 45 minutes to cook that pot pie. Today, my children put a pot pie in the microwave and they have it in 4 minutes. And that's the thinking of the generation that we're serving today, but also the generation that's advancing into the future. And we as a society and managers of great cities have got to leverage those expectations and make sure that our cities are positioned to serve. We have to build cities for 2018 and not 1918. And unfortunately, a lot of us are mired in the old technology and old way of doing business. Our greatest barriers, our first greatest barrier is we've always done it this way. And so we have to transform a culture at the same time our entire society is transitioning and transforming for quicker, better, smarter, faster. And I mean, that's what MaryAnne's talking about in development of housing and other commercial buildings in our cities. That's what you're talking about. Yeah. Faster, smarter, better, quicker. But we can't sacrifice inclusiveness while we do it. And we got to make sure that we're bringing folks along and that they're leveraging expectations, using technology as a tool. We have an ability to bring people in and engage them in the process as well, no matter where they live or what their station in life may be.
Yeah. So expectations, and once again, this connects to the global perspective, competitiveness of the city. Where should I go? Where should I live? Where do I thrive?
Right.
But you also mentioned something about the things that are there. We have legacy infrastructures and we have legacy thinking.
Right.
I think something probably we will be exploring in the conversation today.
Right.
But talking about infrastructures, you are at the Ministry of Housing and Digital, let's say you're launching the digital transformation strategy in Sweden, yeah? Was that by chance or a strategy to connect housing, digital transformation, and what are the initiatives that you have to really create maybe some of the 21st century infrastructures for cities?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me here and having this opportunity to discuss how we in Sweden use digital development to tackle the challenges of today and the future. Because when we took office, we realized that we were responsible for both housing and digital development, and we set up a strategy to see how can we use digital development as a tool to reach the SDG goals. How can we use digitalization to reach our goals when it comes to reducing negative climate effects and other important goals that we have, one of which, of course, is to provide affordable housing for the people of Sweden. Now, what we did was we set up a digitalization strategy, a strategy that shows how we should digitalize our society, but we also did surveys concerning our own sector, the housing sector, where we found out that digitalization in the housing sector, of course, it was, unfortunately, the lowest of the compared sectors. So there was a big potential to do things better. So what my minister thought out was that, so what if we combine this? What if we use what governments really can do? We work with legislature, we work with incentives, and let's do this together with the most important stakeholders in innovationship partnership programs, where we put together the most important stakeholders sitting around the table together with us, not just telling us what they thought we needed to do. And one of the top priorities was to digitalize the planning process. They told us that we should put some effort into actually forcing the municipalities into the system and helping us together develop the society. Now, what we did was put forth some legislation telling them to make this into a more unified system, to put a more unified data into the system through all the planning system, to the building permits and other regulatory items that we have, put it into a certain common field, a setup where you can store the system and make it common and make this available for everyone, make it free, make it open, and make it possible for everyone to reach out and reach into this system. Now we hope that this will all be in place by 2021, that we'll have all our municipalities working within this system, delivering data into it, getting all our national agencies connected, and by that sharing information and make it something that will contribute to innovation in Sweden. And at the same time, of course, make all the building processes go much, much faster, make everything happen faster, and thus meet the needs of the population much, much faster. Because if you're a politician in a country where you need to have 600,000 flats built within the coming years, things gotta happen a bit more faster. And the construction sector, well, it's not known to do things in a smart and innovative way, usually, even if we have heard good examples of that not being the case. But so I think the Swedish government's role is to kind of lead the way, show the possibilities, and when it's necessary, take action.
If I might say that the public-private partnership aspect of what you're saying as a developer, and I started in economic development, so we're a country of cities in America now. There are more people living in cities today than ever in the history of the world, and that number will go to 65% in 2050. And so when you think about cities and what it takes for cities to grow, it's transit-oriented development, it's density, and it's affordable housing.
Right.
And I would say that in our city, we have a crumbling infrastructure. We built a subway entrance in front of Barclays. It cost $72 million to renovate a subway entrance. We did not rebuild the New York City subway system. We renovated an entrance. That is a significant issue for this city to get to the 21st century mentality about how to move people around in a city and encourage them not to drive cars. And then affordable housing. I mean, you know, there are 50% of the people that live in this city are spending over 30% of their income on rent. And we're a city of renters, but and then there's another large group of people spending 50% of their income on paying rent. That's a big problem. So in terms of making it easier for the private sector to deliver the kinds of developments that are necessary for a city to grow and thrive, I would say the affordable housing crisis in this city is probably its biggest constraint in terms of its ability to attract and keep talent. Because in the project we're building in Brooklyn, you can qualify for a middle income unit if you're a single wage earner making $90,000 a year. You can get a special deal. Now that sounds great, but that means that if you make $90,000 a year and you want to live alone, you really can't afford an apartment near the city core in downtown Brooklyn.
Wow.
And that's a significant constraint on our growth as a city.
Let me say, if I can follow with MaryAnne, because I think she's right on target about that. I think the greatest threat to the greatness of our nation is the stagnation of wages that have remained stagnant for over 2 decades now. And what you see in New York, you're seeing kind of a similar trend across the nation, not to the extent of New York in terms of costs, but you're seeing where the cost of living has far outpaced the rise in salaries and wages. And that is a problem for America. It is the wage stagnation is the greatest battle we're going to play or have to deal with going forward. When you have people paying more than 30% of their income, take-home income, on housing, rents or mortgages, they have less choices in terms of their mobility, which to me is the greatest predictor of poverty. If people are locked in a certain area, they have less access to nutrition or better nutrition, access to better nutrition, health care, schools. That is how you keep people locked in. And so I don't want the point that she's making to be lost on this concept of innovation. It's about sustainability, which encompasses all of this. And if people are being left behind because we as a nation haven't pulled the lever and said, after 2 decades, we have allowed people to get wealthier while others have had stagnated wages, we're heading for a train wreck.
And what do you see as the key leverage to unlock the solution for that reality?
It's a couple things. One is we have to acknowledge the challenge. I think is very important that we call it out and say stagnated wages and the fact that the cost of living in all of our major cities is going up. The reality is that MaryAnne's right. Most people are moving into our metro plot complexes where 90% of our GDP comes from. And if those folks are not productive, we as a nation are in trouble. So we have to acknowledge it. 2, we have to call on the private sector to wake up and understand that this is a problem. And we have to change the structure and call for higher wages for our workers in this nation. At the same time, government must work with the private sector to make housing accessible and affordable for their workers. And that's why you see Denver doing things like advancing $150 million to double our impact and surge building of affordable housing, because people have been left behind. And there's no greater threat than people who have less, who have no hope. That's a threat to all of us. And so that's why we need advances. So we have to work in public-private collaboration to kind of address this issue, but call it out. And I think from the highest office in this nation, needs to be called out and say, we need to address this issue of stagnated wages.
So we still need awareness of the problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we need to speak out in relation to that. But I think that what you just mentioned raises another question related to scalability, how we could scale new solutions. Coen, this is something that we briefly talk about scalability. How do you see new models for development and new models for building being scaled up?
Yeah, I actually think it's a really interesting topic. 10 years ago, when Al Gore told me, hey, you have to do something, the world is going down, we have a huge global warming issue, and something has to be done. And I asked him a question, and I said, but should it be the companies that do something, or should it be the governments? Or should it be the NGOs that do something about it? And he said, it will be the businesses that will be the drivers for change. They have to move it first, they have to act. I was like, okay, now this is 10 years ago, and in 10 years a lot has happened. Somebody like Elon Musk has really revolutionized the way we make cars. And today it's possible to buy an electrical car that really makes sense and that brings you somewhere. If we see in the building industry, 10 years ago we were not so far advanced. It was relatively expensive to make a building energy neutral. Today we can make all the new buildings energy neutral, whether it's social housing, affordable housing, or whether it's office buildings, we can do that. We can even redevelop buildings and make them 50% more efficient and pay that from the amount of money that you can save by lower energy costs. You have to solve the split incentive problem, but you have to do it. But now the problem is the following. In this city in New York, I don't think there's any energy neutral building. I've been looking for it, I can't find it. So we have the technology and nothing is happening. And now I have to look back to the city again and say, hey, the technology is there, the entrepreneurs are ready, but it seemed to be difficult that all these dinosaurs that own all that real estate or that own all these cars, they don't want to get out of that diesel engine, they don't want to go into that electrical car. And so there, we somewhere have to find a way to put a price on carbon. Now, putting a price on carbon is a little bit of a political word, and I've learned coming from Europe not to talk about American politics, so I don't want to do that. But what is interesting, if I would be the mayor of New York, I would say, hey, if you pay property tax, pay a little bit more if your building is very unsustainable, and pay a little bit less if you have invested in that and made that work on an energy neutral or almost energy neutral level. And I would say this is the point where entrepreneurs and people from cities have to go hand in hand and say, hey, how can we help each other to really move the needle and solve this problem together?
Yeah, so, and we're talking about new types of partnerships, new partnerships. I think that the mayor mentioned that PPPs or whatever, but there's this thing about mentality that is needed. And Alf, the initiative that you just described in Sweden as a national platform, a national digital platform for cities, how do you see that getting traction in your country, right? You are building partnerships there in order to implement or to create this new reality that we just talked.
Well, what we can see is that we have 290 municipalities. Quite a lot of them, more like 70 to 80 out of them, are actually running ahead. They want to develop things. They want to create the smart grids, smart energy system, smart sewerage systems. But what we can see is that you need from the government to actually support the rest, support all of the country to grow and help them be there together. So that's actually up for us. And when we do that, we also invite all the other important stakeholders to be there together with us and co-create and see what possibilities there are to develop these municipalities and these cities together with the municipalities and see what the needs there are for the citizens, of course. Now, we believe that if you want to create a true smart city, that the smartness must be evaluated by the citizens, of course. So this has become a very important part for the Swedish government, is to create systems for the citizens to take part in the planning processes, for the citizens to be participatory, to see that they can contribute, they can put in some extra value into this. And when they do that, they feel more secure in the city. They feel that the city is there for them. So, we think that we are into something, but now we also have a population in Sweden that's really reliable. They rely upon the state. They think that we are trustworthy. We have a population that like digitalization, and they think that's something positive also for them. So we have a lot of good stuff to work with.
So citizen engagement,
Yeah.
it's a critical issue. How do you address that, Mayor? Citizen engagement in the context, and let's say the context of the government of the 21st century city.
I mean, you got to find a way. You have to use different modes of engaging people. Our teenage and young adult children are not going to engage the way we might engage. Some of us would prefer to show up in a town hall meeting like this, get the information, and engage, interact with the elected officials or the officials that they're talking to. Our young people engage electronically or digitally these days. That's where they get their news. That's where they converse with one another on the platforms. And so a 21st century city meets residents where they are and provide those avenues for engagement as best they can in any way that they want to engage. I remember this one particular morning where I was sitting at the kitchen table reading the newspaper, holding it like I do every Sunday morning, which is my favorite thing to do with my dog. And my son comes up and he looks at me and goes, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm reading the paper." And he says, "Oh, you're so old-fashioned." And I said, "Well, you want a piece of this?" He says, "No, because the reality is if news wants me to know about it, it comes to me, I don't go to it." And that's leveraging the expectation of our millennial generation. And so we got to meet those young people where they are, to be quite honest with you. And if I try traditional means for them, they're not going to engage. But if I use the platforms that they're most familiar with, then I have a way of reaching them. But we got to be diverse as a 21st century city.
And in doing that, if you think about it, we're not at work anymore, we're on work.
Yeah.
And so a city needs to accommodate that ever-changing landscape of how people want to work. And they want to work at home. But I also like to say that, in the 90s, this idea of staying at home in your slippers and working from home, it didn't work out so well. You know why? Because we all want community. And that's the story of WeWork and beyond, which is people want to be with other people. And even if you're not in the same business, you want to be with like-minded people that are driving change and embracing technology. So we did this little building that could, I call it on Roosevelt Island, which is a 21st century building. It's a model of a building, not a space within a building, where we changed all the rules about how to put a building together in New York City. And it was done with Cornell and Technion. And that to me is a great model. It's a very small building by New York City standards. It's 280,000 square feet, which is not a skyscraper, but it is a building that has enormous impact in terms of the ecosystem inside that building and how students are with entrepreneurs, tech companies, established white shoe firms, and the mashup and the collisions, both deliberate and accidental throughout the way the building is designed, is what's going to make change happen from that, that single building. So under one roof, 1 billion ideas will be launched, and that won't happen from someone's living room when they're not interacting with others.
Yeah. So it's a kind of a new type of infrastructure that is needed, or innovation infrastructures, right? And talking about innovation, one of the things that we agreed before coming on the stage is that we would innovate in this panel, and we would take questions from the floor. So I know that we have a mic somewhere. So if anyone here has a question, please raise your hand. We have mic runners in the back.
Yeah, good morning. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. MaryAnne Gilmartin. I'm a parent, but interested in smart cities. I discovered this concept at a History of Architecture conference at UPenn this spring. And I'm here today. Now, I heard the mayor of Denver, the story with his son, and it makes me smile because I don't see any youth in this gathering, and I can understand it's only for the super experts, etc. I mean, we have so many celebrities from all over the world. So my promise, and I brought my freshman college girl, my promise is to do as much outreach with the DOE here in New York, I'm from Brooklyn, with the CEC Council Education, and maybe at your level, you should spread more the word about these smart cities, because the kids they're ahead of us. And if we tell them, come see what's happening here, they're gonna say, oh, well, let me tell you how you should do this. So this is my modest commentaire about this.
I think it's a great comment.
Anyone
good.
would like to comment on that?
No, I think we get it. I mean, that's where we're all saying the same thing, that we have a diversity of populations that we're serving, that we're trying to house, that we're trying to move about our cities, and we have to be able to fit, really, again, those expectations that people have. You know, in the city of Denver, when we go compete for major companies to move to our city, I'll tell you what the #1 attraction is. We can talk about tax regulation, that's important. We can talk about the fact we get 300 days of sunshine a year. That's very important. We have one of the lowest crime rates in any big city in the nation. That's important. Quality of life is next to none. You got great outdoor active living. Have you guys sold on Denver yet? I can talk about all those things, but if I don't talk about options and mobility, they see their employees and they go, our employees don't necessarily want to drive to work. And we've been able to track companies through billions of dollars in investment in transit. Because people recognize that their employees are saying that when we grew up, we were taught don't allow anything to take your attention off of this steering wheel. Well, the new generation, there is nothing, they're taught, or their attitude is I don't want nothing to take my attention off of this device. And so I'd rather someone get me where I need to be while I'm staying connected, which we are doing every day.
And if I might say, I just launched my own company, a development company founded by a woman, really embracing inclusiveness and stating that beauty can be created in the real estate province and it can add great value and we can make money, make beauty, and change cities. They're not irreconcilable. And in New York City, it's not always the case. It's a commoditized business many times over. My son, again, it's not just what we say, but where we say it and how information is consumed. And so my son is absolutely obsessed with the idea that it has to be through social media and Instagram and all of that. So I think it's an amazing observation. It's so obvious that I'm slightly embarrassed that we're up here talking about innovation and you look in the room and there are not a large preponderance of young people. Yeah. It could be the ticket price to get in the front door. We'll have to look into it. But in the end of the day, it does really contradict everything we're up here saying, and we ought to think about that.
Maybe they're all of them following in social media. Yeah, just.
It's true.
Yeah, can I give one comment? I think it's actually underestimated how big the effect of technologies is on cities and how much more change we're going to have in the next years. If you think back in the history, Mr. Ford came up with an idea to make cars in a different way. These cars became a lot cheaper, a lot more people had a car, and suddenly we saw the start of suburbia. And suddenly the whole of the United States of America was built in a different way because it became possible to have an individual car and to drive to this place out of town. If we look 5 years ahead, and this is only 5 years ahead, our cities will be full with cars that are driverless. Now, I was at the World Economic Forum this winter, and there was a scientist from BMW, and he said, if BMW would be allowed to have exclusivity on all the cars in Manhattan, we could take out 75% of all the cars. We would only be left with 25% of the cars, and we could guarantee you 100% there's always a car available and will bring you in exactly the right amount of time to the place where you want to go. Now, if you close your eyes and you think about New York City, you think about Manhattan, we have 75% less cars. That would allow us to make beautiful bike lanes, walkways, etc. And now, in the talk among people that make cities, the big discussion is the following. If a city will be so attractive, but it's also so easy to get out of a city, which one is going to be the bigger factor? Is it going to be more attractive to go out of the city and live somewhere in suburbia where you can driving out there, reading your news on your iPad? Or is it going to be so attractive to be in that city because the city is greener, more quiet, a more pleasant place to be, that everybody in suburbia will come back into the city? We don't know yet, but one thing is for sure, the cities are going to change with this coming of technology.
Yeah. So for sure, efficiency, in city, but also this idea of assets utilization, space as a critical asset, right? We have another question.
Great panel. I have a question for Coen. In terms of this notion that everybody kind of wants to work wherever, as a developer of office buildings, how are you going to ensure people are going to come to work in the buildings? So maybe you can address that.
So I think that in the past, a building was utilized in one way, and you would go there, and then you would do your work, you would read your contract, or what it is that you were doing in a building. Nowadays, we see a diversity of activities in a building. I think we're all a little bit surprised about co-working, what it's done, and the amount of buildings that are being transformed. The modern buildings that we are now making have an amazing atrium, they have roof terraces. Maybe you're familiar with the Soho House concept, but we even want to bring little terraces and pools. Pool, by the way, is then also used if there's a fire to have water right away on the roof there. But we think that just going into an office to do work, that's in the past. You can work everywhere, in a coffee shop or at home. You want to go into that building to work together with other people that are there. And why not do that in a fun environment? And so the great thing is that 10 years from now or 20 years from now, all our buildings will look a lot more attractive than they were in the past.
Yeah. Any other questions? I think that we can take one question. Yep.
Thank you. This question is for Mayor Hancock. It's obvious that Denver has taken a very progressive and innovative approach toward, being a smart city and providing more value. But obviously there are people out there who don't have the best of intentions. What is Denver doing in terms of cybersecurity to make sure its citizens and all the information is, kept safe, and then avoid some of the stuff that's been happening around the news recently?
Yeah, I appreciate that. One is, again, to be aware. We spend a lot of resources on protecting our data, protecting our citizens through the city system as best we can. And so we have a full-time staff that sits and watches, and I've been in the room, very few people walked in this room, but they sit and watch the cyber attack attempts on our system. And if you listen to the FBI, every 5 seconds there is an attempt on the United States system. Cities are not much different. And in fact, when I walked in the room, they said, there goes one from Africa, there goes one from China, there's one from Korea. You can literally see the attempts on our system. And so we're constantly working to innovate ourselves, constantly working to protect ourselves, and constantly working to make sure that we are watching our data and who's trying to infiltrate our systems. So a lot of people, that's all our team, that's all they do is sit and watch and making sure that we're staying up on the virus protection necessary, but also on the attempts that are trying to come into our system.
Thanks for highlighting the extremely important issue of cybersecurity.
Absolutely.
All across industry sectors and for sure for cities. As we approach the end of this panel, I want to go for a last round and ask you about opportunities, right? What are the opportunities that you see in this new reality, not just in your cities or the place where you work, but around the globe? And also, when you touch upon that, what are some of the concrete things or the one thing that you believe that together we could do? What are some actionables? Starting with you, Alf, we have a group of Swedish entrepreneurs here bringing technologies for cities. What are the opportunities?
Well, what I can see is that Sweden's got a lot of smart companies. They are really used to work with innovative solutions to contribute to a more sustainable society. Now, we have worked with diverse things such as waste management, creating more energy efficient systems, making installations of different systems work more efficient. We know that we have systems in place that will create smarter and better cities, and we know that we have companies that can contribute to make cities all around the world much, much better places to live at. But what we also know is that we have companies and we have citizens that feel secure working in digitalized modes or digitalized manners. We have skilled, trained people that feel secure, that know how to act, that know how to compete and know how to act in the cyber war-like state that we are at present. And I think that what we can do from Sweden is to bring out the knowledge into other parts of the world and contribute, because that's something that we are pretty good at, is to cooperate and learn from others. And by doing that, we develop our products, we develop our services, and by that help ourselves and help others.
Coen, one opportunity, one thing that we could do together.
I think that in the past, a lot of entrepreneurs were a little bit stuck. We had a lot of big companies, not a lot of innovation. Today, we have a whole new wave of young entrepreneurs that want to do things very different. Sometimes also older entrepreneurs that want to do things very different. And we see that the politicians are now more open to engage with this group of entrepreneurs. If I would like to build, let's say, 100,000 affordable houses in your beautiful city,
We love it.
then I would say the thing is to sit down, take these entrepreneurs with you and say, we have this problem, how are we going to solve that together? In the old days, it was too much fighting between governments and entrepreneurs. And today, there's much more of a playing field where people can engage and work together and solve issues.
New
You know, as we-
collaborations solve for cities.
Yeah, as we advance as a society to being more digital, as we transform to be more focused on technology and the opportunities out there, I want us to remember what Albert Einstein said over 100 years ago. And I think it presents our greatest opportunity. And it's not contradictory to what we've talked about here, and that is to have a diversity of ways to engage people. But nothing substitutes the human interaction one-on-one. And Albert Einstein said over 100 years ago, I fear today that technology overtakes our human interaction because we will have a society of fools. Think about that for a moment. And we got to make sure that our generation coming up never forgets there's no substitute for this one-on-one, face-to-face, press in the flesh, and caring for each other, eye to eye.
Well, here on that, and I'll say each of you gentlemen will leave through one of our airports,
Yeah.
and there's nothing more depressing as a New Yorker than to realize how backward our infrastructure is and how it has to change. Yet technology brings us all closer together. And I would say we need to protect our sanctuary cities. We need to embrace the fact that people come from all over the globe to come to cities like New York, and that's what's going to drive change, and that's what's going to make New York City a 21st century city.
I think that the key message for this conversation, my take, is we need 21st century thinking
Yeah.
and new tools for engagement. For this 20th century person, it was really a pleasure to be with you, moderate this conversation. I had a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you.